Welcome, ladies. This is Girl Power I see today. Is it girls? Is it a girls' school or just no boys at the moment interested? Claire? No, it's not Claire. It's Amelia, and I've had to write that down because that confused me. Amelia. So is it an all boys school, all girls school?
No, it's mixed. I don't know. They just haven't volunteered, so.
Yeah, they just want to muck around and not get onto with doing anything like this. That's usual for boys. Anyway, welcome all of you. Tell me, have you seen the little presentation that I put out before? Because I thought what I'd do is I'll refresh your minds and I'll play it again for you. But have you seen it already? Yeah, okay. But I'm going to play it again and that will refresh our minds. Now, when I say I'm going to play it again, this is going to be a bit of an experiment and I'll make sure that it works. So let's just give it a go. And I'm going to share my screen here, and with a bit of luck it's going to come up with the presentation that you've seen already. One second. It's going to be here. Here we go. So do you see that in front of you, ladies? Okay. Let me go through it, and hopefully the videos will play when we come to them. If they don't, we'll skip through them. But I'd like to tell you a little bit about my organization, which is called TwoSides. And the reason it was called TwoSides is because we think that when there is any sort of discussion about any subject, there are always people with different opinions. So we like to tell people that print and paper is an attractive, powerful and sustainable way to read and learn, but we're aware there might be other people that disagree. So we are we're not a charity, but we're a not-for-profit. That means we're not a commercial organization. We're funded by the industry, so we tell our industry's story. And we think there's a lot of bad information about using paper. Print is wasteful, or digital communication, emails and stuff like that is better for the environment. Sometimes you might get an email and at the bottom of it, it says, think before you print, or move to online and save paper, save a tree. All these things are messages that are built around the belief that paper might actually destroy forests. That is not true, but that's what we have to deal with. So what do people think about paper? Well, we've done surveys, and 63% think that only recycled paper should be used. 60% or 59% think that our forests in Europe are shrinking, which would not be a good thing. 53% think that electronic communication is better for the environment. 53% believe that paper communication, production rather, uses an excessive amount of water. A third of people think that paper is a wasteful product. And a quarter of people, 25% of consumers, think paper production is a major cause of global greenhouse gas emissions. Now, I don't know if you've studied that, but that's what happens with all human activity. It creates carbon. Carbon goes into the atmosphere, and that leads to global warming. So that would not be a good thing. But this is what people think about paper. And what we try to do is to put the record straight. So it might be later on we have to ask you, what do you think? But let's skip on that for a moment. So we think that print and paper have a great environmental story to tell. Now, it would be interesting if you could see how paper was made. You might have studied it or looked at it at school. Sometimes there are nice little projects. But basically, you mix up all the middle from a tree, the soft bit, not the wooden bark around the outside, but the soft bit in the middle. You heat it up, you boil it up, and it becomes like paper mache. Have you made paper mache? where you put paper and starch together in a bucket. It looks a little bit like that. And you use a lot of water. A piece of paper that contains quite a lot of water when it's made, about 90% of the paper when it's made is water, and then it's dried to make it about 5% of water when you use it. But there's a lot of water used for paper making. But what happens is the water comes in, and then the water is returned, is cleaned and returned to the environment in as good and sometimes better than it was when it was first extracted from the river or the lake or whatever source you're getting the water from. So actually, 93% of all the water used is returned clean to the environment. So we are a big user of water, but it doesn't disappear. It goes back again. 90% of all the wood we use for making paper comes from European forests. So we don't bring a lot in from outside of Europe. And those forests in Europe have been growing by over 1,500 football pitches every day. So just imagine the size of a football pitch, then try to imagine what 1,500 of those look like. And that's the size of forests which are growing in Europe. So it is not true that forests are shrinking. So the forests which provide wood for what we use to make paper are growing. Now I'm going to try and play this video and let's see if it works. If you can hear it when it starts, put your hands up. If you can't hear it, I don't know, do something else. Here it comes. Hopefully. No, that's not going to. Oh, wait a minute. Here, try that. No, that's not going to play. So we'll not worry about that. But you've got the copy of it, and it's quite a nice video to show how forests are growing. So let's think a little bit more about paper. What would be more environmentally friendly, do you think? You know, if you were learning from books or using an iPad or a laptop, which would be more sustainable? You see, on one hand, making books and paper uses energy and trees from forests. So obviously that's going to consume resources. Although the forests are growing and we put the trees back in the short term, it uses a lot of wood. But on the other hand, if you use an iPad or a laptop, they're very expensive to make. They use a lot of very precious metals. It's not an easy balance to say which is more expensive to produce. There's also the question about what happens to books or laptops, and that's very simplistic. It's not just paper or it's digital, but what happens to them when you're finished with them? Have you ever thought about that? Well, books and paper can be easily recycled. That's not a problem. But what happens to your old iPads, your iPhones? I don't know how often you go through your iPhones. My children and grandchildren seem to go through them at a rate of knots, and there's always some new one that's being brought out. But what happens to the old ones? I might have some statistics about that in a moment, but the amount of electronic waste building up every year is absolutely enormous. So you have to compare that over 72% of paper is recycled in Europe. Actually, if you think about the last time you had maybe an Amazon delivery that comes in a nice box, well, about 84% of all those nice boxes that we get our stuff in through supermarkets or through shops or by Amazon, 84% of those are recycled. So we reuse paper and cardboard really well. On the other hand, in 2014, and I must get a better, more later date for this, but this is the last information we had. So it will certainly be more by now. 9 million tons of electronic waste was generated from mobile phones, laptops and tablets. That's throughout the world, 9 million tons. I would estimate that's at least double today. That's absolutely huge. And many of these end up in third world countries, maybe Africa and places like that, where they have cheap labor and they try to break them up to get back to the components. It's not a very successful or very clean job. So let's come to the Shine Awards, Best Sustainability Initiative Leading to a Greener Future. I've tried to give you a little bit of a background to paper and what the alternatives might be in digital. The reality is, of course, that I suspect if you're trying to devise a school newspaper or school leaflet or something like that, you'll circulate it in different ways, and some will be digital. You'll send it by PDFs maybe, or social media, Facebook, whatever, to your friends and family and people you know, or you'll print it and hand it out and give it out. So in thinking about doing that, what could you and your school do to be friendly to the environment? And I don't know what you do, but I sort of set out some ideas, the sort of things that you would think about in terms of your own school. So it might be, how much electricity does your school use? You're not paying your family's electricity bills yet, but they're going to be quite high every month or every quarter. And there's a bill and it tells you exactly how much you're using, and your school will have that. You could find out how much energy you're using. Where does your energy come from? Wind, coal, gas, which is more sustainable? And these days you can elect to get your electricity from green sources if you want. So you could specify, I only want to get my electricity from wind power, which is probably the cleanest way these days to get electricity. Of course, we can't generate enough at the moment to satisfy all our needs, but then where's energy wasted? What could you do in your school to stop the waste of energy? Well, that requires some thinking about. It could be just make sure the school is nicely insulated and stuff like that. And if you could stop wasting energy, how could the school use less energy? Are the lights all controlled so that they go off if there's nobody in the room? Little simple things you can think about where technology could help. So energy is a big sustainable problem for the world in the future. The growing population of the world simply demands more energy that we can sustainably produce at the moment. Secondly, what about a project that, again, that would make your school greener in terms of materials and recycling? What happens in the school to your unwanted paper and other materials? Do you collect it, sort it, recycle it? Is the school actively trying to cut back on plastic? And how are they doing that? And can you see areas of the school where plastic materials are being used, which, by the way, are very robust and perfectly good in certain situations, but in particular single-use plastics, the water bottles that you carry around, everybody carries around, they're terrible. You know, could they be replaced with a stainless water bottle which you reuse and refill every day? There are various things like that that you can think about, but definitely you want to collect the paper, make sure it's properly recycled, and cut back on the single-use materials which frankly consume a lot of energy, and then it's a big problem. I think, and don't quote me on this, if you compare the recycling of paper, which is about 72 to 84% for cartons and boxes, to plastic, which I think is about 17%, a lot of plastic ends up in landfill, and from landfill it drifts into the oceans. And I'm sure you've all seen the pictures and the series on television with Sir David Attenborough and others that show you what happens to plastic that gets in the ocean. So materials and recycling, that's a very interesting opportunity. And finally, I think in the classroom, How do you learn? Which is better for the environment? What happens to your old books and laptops? A little bit of the same thing. I have heard many stories of schools saying they're moving away from books and laptops to online. I understand that. It's very convenient. And of course, what would we do at the moment if we couldn't work with laptops and being online? But in the main, moving away from books can be a cost issue. In many situations, books can be not only more sustainable, but actually there are various studies that people learn better from using a book than rather studying online. And I'm sure we could have an interesting conversation about how easy it is for you to study online at the moment rather than studying in your classroom, perhaps with books. Oh, there's another one, going green. How do you encourage your fellow students to go green? Could you create a guide for students on making the school more sustainable? Could you develop posters around the school? What would they look like? What would they say? How could you make them attractive? Can you make sustainability fun? So I'm going to end there because the videos are not playing in this format. I think it's time for me to stop talking. And before, I know you've got a list of questions actually, because I have some in front of me. And so we'll try to do it in the right order. But before that, is there anything generally that you would like to ask before we just go through the questions that you've raised? Feel free to put your hand up or shout out if there's anything that has occurred to you whilst I've been speaking that you'd like to raise now. If there's not, don't worry, we can move on and it will come out later. But anything? Good. Okay, good, that's fine. So I know you've got a list of questions. I'm not sure who's got what to ask, but I'll start as suggested with, let me get you all up at the top of my screen. I'm going to start, oh, I've lost one of you, hold on, why is that? I need to extend this along the top. Who have I lost here? Okie dokie. No, I haven't lost anybody. It's just that I can only see 3 of you at a time, so it's rather tricky. So I'm going to ask Amelia to start.
Can you tell us a bit about how your company got started?
Yes, well, one of the main reasons why we got started was because my colleagues in the industry, and I worked in the industry for many years, and we used to get together as an industry trying to tackle the problems that we faced, and kept coming up at meetings that our children were coming home from school and their teachers had told them when they'd heard that we were working for the paper or printing industry that we were responsible for killing the Amazonian rainforest. And wasn't it terrible about all the paper that we're using? So, you know, our own children, my own children were coming back saying, is it true, Dad? You know, is that what we're doing? And so we decided that actually the industry needed to do its job better and set out the facts very clearly about our industry, about the environment. And what we did was we developed a myths and facts booklet, and we set out all the myths, like we don't recycle anything, we're destroying the forests, and we use a lot of water. Some of the things which we've just talked about. And we set out the myths, and then we set out the facts behind it with evidence and with references. So we wanted to put the record straight, and that's how we started. And because it was the myths and the facts, that's where we started TwoSides. And it was to correct misunderstandings about the environment in regard to our industry. So that's the first question. Who's with the second one? Oh, Erin, well done, go ahead.
How do you get people to support your business?
I make myself a big nuisance. I keep banging on their door and telling them that they should be supportive of us. But why should they? That's how I do it. But why should they support us? Well, clearly, if people think that paper is an irresponsible and unsustainable product, they won't use it. And if they don't use it, then they won't buy it. And if they don't buy it, it means a lot of people in our industry will be out of a job. And whilst we don't want to encourage anybody to use anything to an excess, we want to make sure that people can use paper and happily print on it without thinking that it is going to be bad for the environment. So by doing our work, we encourage people to use the paper they need, and therefore we protect the volume of print and paper that people use. That's all to the benefit of our members, and so they fund us with money and resources, maybe free printing or free services. For example, every newspaper in the UK runs advertisements for us telling their readers how sustainable paper is. I'm aware that probably you're not a newspaper reading generation. I'll take a quick poll. How many of you read a newspaper ever? Oh, wait a minute. I'm going to go down because I'm not seeing anybody on my screen, but I suspect I know the answer. Anybody with a hand up? Shh, no, you see, there you go. It's social media, isn't it? But that's another hobby horse of mine. I do wonder what information comes from social media compared to newspapers, but that's another subject. Yes, they support us with materials, with advertisements, with money. Next question. Who's the next question? Charlotte, go ahead.
Why do you think paper has such a bad reputation?
Well, I think if you turn on the news, or you even read Twitter, Facebook, wherever you get information from, you will see pictures of the destruction of rainforests, which is shocking in the world, particularly Southeast Asia and South America. I'm sure you all know the story, but of course, you're not just destroying trees, and trees have been described as the lungs of the earth. You probably know all this, but trees, what they do is that they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So all that horrible carbon dioxide that we're putting into the atmosphere because of industry is being taken out of the atmosphere by trees. The more trees there are, the more carbon dioxide they absorb, and they do that in the daytime, and at nighttime they put out oxygen into the atmosphere. So they not only clear out the carbon dioxide, they put oxygen, which we breathe, back into the atmosphere. So trees have been called the lungs of the world, and the rainforests are the by far and away the largest areas where this happens. And so every time they are being destroyed, it is bad for us. And so people think the rainforests, trees make paper. I use paper, therefore I must be destroying the rainforest when I use it. So that's why I think paper, people believe, is not a sustainable product and may have a bad reputation. So what we do, as I've tried to show you, is that we say, look, we don't touch the rainforest. Now, I can't say 100%. I'm sure there's some bad practice somewhere, but by and large, we don't touch the rainforest. The trees are not suitable for making paper. What we do is we grow our paper, we use it, we replant it. It comes from sustainable sources. So that, I think, is why we've got a bad reputation, one of the main things. People also think we don't recycle, which I've already mentioned, and we do. But I think it's mainly the destruction of rainforests is the one thing that people associate with trees and paper. If you want to know, mainly the rainforests are being cut back because people in those countries have very low incomes, and therefore they clear the trees, they sell the timber, they make themselves some money. It probably goes into furniture making or something, and then they put cattle on the land, and cattle can make them far more money than watching trees. So it's a very complicated picture, but it's not the responsibility of the paper industry. Next question. Who is that then? With the, who have we not had? Is that wait a minute, hold on, I'm not wait a minute, sorry, my fault. I don't see everybody. Hand up. That's it, Izzy, sorry about that. You disappeared off my screen. I had problems with my video and I swapped my laptop. Carry on.
Do you think we should do more to be sustainable?
Absolutely. But I think it's not just schools, I think it's everybody. As we've already said, you know, your generation will grow up in a world where the population is even bigger than it is today, and we cannot continue to consume resources at the rate that we are at the moment. And I'm afraid it's going to fall to you guys to inherit the problem, which is very unfair because your mums and dads have created the problem and your grandparents, because using resources was seen to be cheap, easy. I mean, 500 years ago, Europe was covered in trees. You would have to walk miles to find people living. It was nothing like it is today. And we cannot go on growing and using more. So yes, I think schools are an ideal place to start. It's to get young people interested in the whole process of sustainability and the environment. And we have to make you aware so that you put pressure on your parents and your grandparents and you become enthusiasts yourselves to continue to be aware that we need to cut down. So schools are a great place to start, but it's only one place. I think we're back to Amelia.
If we made posters encouraging a more environmentally friendly process, would it be undermined by the use of paper and ink?
I don't think so, for all the reasons I've given you. I think, but there are certain there are certain things you can do, and it crosses a little bit to the next question, I think. So I won't take that one away for the moment. But no, I don't think so. I think you have to be careful what materials you use. You clearly don't want to be wasteful. You want to make sure that when people have finished reading, whatever it is, that they're recycled. So no, I don't think it's a problem at all. What you have to think about, I think, is if you're doing posters or designing a newspaper or a magazine, is you want to make it attractive. So you want to make sure that as many people read it as possible. So there's lots of evidence that something that is printed and is able to be handed out is far more informative than a quick email or a quick social media blog or something like that. It lasts a long time. You can take it home, you can read it, other people can read it. So you want to think about how you make your publications, whether it's, say, magazines, newspapers, or posters. You want to make them attractive, you want to make them readable, and then think about how you do this in a sustainable way. Has that answered your question, Erin? Amelia, yep, sorry. And oh, hello, Charlotte's back. disappeared for a minute. And who's the next question from? Erin.
How do you think we could be more mindful about the environment when planning a newspaper or magazine?
Now, I knew you were going to ask me that because it was the next on my list too. Well done. And that follows, of course, from Amelia's question. First of all, find out about the materials. Now, in terms of ink, I don't know how you're going to produce it, but when you recycle, the ink is removed and it's not reused as ink, but it's removed and used for other purposes. But think about the paper. Your paper should certainly come from a sustainable resource, from a sustainable forest. So most papers are. It's very unusual to not find one, but you can ask where your school gets their paper from. They could ask the supplier to assure them that it's sustainable. You could think about using recycled paper. And I say that you could think. Some people think that only recycled paper should be used, but that's not a sustainable way to look at it, because if you can imagine, eventually, I think you can recycle paper about 6 or 7 times before it disintegrates. Every time you use it, it loses a bit of its strength. So we have to keep topping up the chain of paper with new material. So if you think about it, you can use paper 6 or 7 times. 72% of it is recycled in Europe. So you need to get a little bit more in all the time. So you could choose recycled paper if you felt that was what you wanted to do. That's not a problem, but you don't have to, because the paper that you're printing on will get recycled and it will come back somewhere. And what usually happens is, as paper gets reused, it drifts down from really high quality paper down into boxes and stuff where it becomes a little browner, a little bit less less quality. So it goes down into lower quality materials. So you could choose to use that. I think, yeah, make sure it's recycled. Try to encourage people to pass it to their friends to read, so that, you know, you print one newspaper, but if 7 people read it, it's got to be good, hasn't it? So maybe you don't do a newspaper for every person in the school. Maybe you say, if you want your own copy, that'd be great. Otherwise, put 10 in each classroom or something like that, you know, and let people copy it. There may be other ideas you could think about. Next question, who's that? Well done, Charlotte. Off you go.
Your ideas have been successfully communicated to so many countries. What's your top tip for marketing and communicating ideas?
Well, it's all to do with, that's a good question. Who wrote that one? That's a challenge. Am I right? Are you planning a school newspaper or school magazine? Is that right? Okay. So when you're planning it, you've got to think about the reader, and what readers want, because readers are normally lazy. We're all lazy if we can get away with it. They want something that's very clear. They need to be attracted to it. So you need headlines that compel people to read further, exciting headlines. You need to make your words simple and concise. Don't try to make it too complicated. Make it easy to read. Start with the interesting things first, and then maybe go into a bit more detail so you draw people in. So as your story unfolds, it gets a bit more complicated, but you don't lose people by making it complicated at the beginning. Yeah, and keep it simple. Don't try to do anything. So I would say be clear in your layout. Don't be afraid of white space, they call it. Don't try to fill every bit of white space with text and words. And keep your text simple, concise. And put pictures in there that are relevant. Put links in there that will encourage people to read more. Make sure you have an online electronic copy of it, because that's very good for putting links in so that people can read further if they want more information. I think that's about it. And I think we've got one more question. Who would that be? Wait a minute. Let's flick along. Izzy. Again, you're always last on my list. I'm sorry about that, Izzy. Got the worst draw there. I can't hear you, Izzy. You might be on mute. There you go.
Okay. How do you think the future of sustainability with paper and print will look?
I think it will look fine. I would say that, wouldn't I? But I think we're going to be using less paper. You know, you are a generation that uses less paper than your parents, and your parents probably were the highest users, because in your grandparents' days there might have been some shortages or whatever like that, or your great grandparents. But I think you'll be using less paper. It'll be higher quality, the paper. There will certainly be even more of an insistence that it comes from sustainable sources. So I think you know, it's got a very healthy future. It will continue to be necessary to show that it's recyclable, that we're doing the right things in the production of it. I think the production of it will become less energy intensive, and I know that there's lots of research going on at the moment as to how to make paper with less energy, less water. So it's going to be a more sustainable product. We'll use less of it. It will probably become a more valuable product. So you might give people, you know, I suspect that if you see paper these days, it's because people might give you presents as books, or you might buy the occasional magazine. It becomes a bit of a luxury product. Of course, note paper, notebooks and stuff will be used because people like to write their thoughts on paper still. I don't think we'll go over to all electronic for that. So less volume, but more sustainable, and I think it has a good future. Now, I think that takes us to the end of the question, but I'm going to, of the 8 questions, but if anybody's got any other questions that have come out of this, or anything that you would like to talk about in terms of your project, where you might want some help or advice, just shout, or be free, of course, after this call to get in touch with Annalise or through your teacher, and we'll certainly be happy to help and maybe give you some input as you go along this journey of creating your newspaper or magazine. Does anybody have any more questions just at this moment? Good. Well, I wish you lots of luck, and as I say, feel free to keep us involved if it would be helpful. If you hit stumbling blocks, then just press the green button for assistance by means of an email via your teacher or something like that. Anyway, I wish you all luck. Thank you for joining this call.